He was a slave with nothing left to lose. He was about to become a jarl with everything to prove. When he offered her freedom and his heart, she did the unthinkable. She said no. Not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much to let him destroy everything for her. In a world where one choice could mean survival or ruin, where love was the most dangerous rebellion of all, she refused the one thing every slave dreams of. But her refusal didn't save them. It marked the beginning of a brutal test that would force them both to choose between duty and desire, between what their hearts demanded and what their world would allow. He would be made to hurt her in ways that shattered them both. She would be torn from everything familiar and given a chance at the life stolen from her years ago. Now she stands at a crossroads, free for the first time in 12 years, facing an impossible question. Do you chase the safety of a life rebuilt, or risk everything to return to the man you sacrificed it all to protect? The answer will either forge something unbreakable or destroy the last fragile piece of hope they have left. The iron collar felt heavier that morning, though it weighed the same as it had for the past 12 years. Dalla's fingers traced the cold metal circling her neck, a habit she'd developed whenever fear crept too close to the surface. The great hall of Jarl Ericsson's longhouse smelled of smoke and yesterday's roasted lamb. But underneath that familiar scent, something felt wrong. The air pressed against her chest like an invisible hand, squeezing tighter with each breath. She knew that feeling. It always came before everything changed. Gunnar sat alone at the high table, his broad shoulders hunched forward, fingers gripping a wooden cup so hard his knuckles had gone white. He hadn't touched the ale inside. He hadn't looked at her either, not once since she'd entered to begin her morning duties. That absence of his gaze carved a hollow space in her chest. For 3 years since she'd turned 19 and he'd returned from his failed attempt at raiding, they'd shared secret glances across this very room. Small moments of recognition that said, "I see you. You're not invisible to me." But today, his eyes stayed fixed on the table's grain as if answers hid between the wood's dark lines. Dalla picked up the heavy pitcher, her movements practiced and silent. A good thrall moved like smoke, her mother had whispered during those first brutal months of captivity before fever took her. Be invisible, be useful, be alive. The words had kept Dalla breathing through beatings, through the casual cruelties that came with being property, through the gnawing shame of existing at someone else's mercy. She poured mead into Gunnar's cup, and her hand trembled. A single drop splashed onto his fingers. He flinched as if she'd burned him. Dalla. Her name left his mouth like a prayer and a curse tangled together. I need to speak. With you. After the morning meal, come to the storage room behind the stables. Tell no one. The pitcher nearly slipped from her grip. Gunnar never spoke to her directly in front of others. Never risked the questions it would raise. Whatever churned behind his haunted gray eyes, it was big enough to make him reckless. She nodded once, barely a dip of her chin, and moved away before anyone noticed the exchange. Her heart hammered against her ribs so violently she wondered if others could hear it. Across the hall, Ragnhild watched from her seat near the fire, her sharp features arranged in an expression Dalla couldn't read. Gunnar's older sister had always studied everything with the intensity of a hawk tracking prey. Beautiful, brilliant Ragnhild, who could recite laws and sagas better than any skald, who understood trade routes and alliances with a clarity that should have made her Jarl instead of her brothers. But she'd been born with the wrong body for power, and that injustice had carved something hard and hungry behind her intelligent eyes. The morning dragged like a wounded animal. Dalla scrubbed cooking pots until her fingers cracked and bled. She swept ashes from the hearth. She carried water from the well, each bucket heavy enough to make her shoulders scream. But none of the pain touched her. Not really. Her mind stayed locked on that storage room, on Gunnar's voice breaking around her name, on the terrible certainty that her small, careful life was about to shatter. When she finally slipped between the buildings toward the stables, the autumn sun hung low and weak in the sky. Cold bit through her thin wool dress. She hadn't been given a proper cloak in years. Thralls didn't need such comforts. Her breath came out in small clouds as she pushed open the storage room's warped door. Gunnar stood with his back to her, surrounded by coils of rope and fishing nets. The space smelled of salt and tar. He turned when he heard her enter, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. She'd seen men look that way before making terrible choices, before crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "My father is dying," he said, and the words fell between them like stones into still water. "The sickness in his lungs has spread to his blood. The healers give him 3 days, perhaps 4. Dalla's throat tightened. Jarl Eriksson had been harsh but fair, never cruel for cruelty's sake. A decent master, by the low standards thralls measured such things. But more than that, he'd been the barrier between Gunnar and the weight of leadership. Gunnar, who hated violence, who wrote poetry in secret, who'd vomited after his first kill in battle and never lived down the shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it. "Don't be sorry." Gunnar stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke clinging to his tunic. "Dalla, when he dies, I become Jarl. Do you understand what that means?" She understood he'd be crushed by expectations he could never meet. She understood the Carls who made up the free farmers would question his every decision. She understood his sister would circle like a wolf scenting weakness. But she didn't understand why he'd brought her here to say it. Gunnar reached into his belt and pulled out a small iron key. His hand shook as he held it between them. "This unlocks your collar. I'm freeing you, Dalla. Today. Right now." The world tilted sideways. She grabbed the door frame to stay upright, splinters driving into her palm. "What? Gunnar, you can't just—" "I can. I'm about to be Jarl. I can free whoever I choose." His words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "And after you're free, after a respectful time has passed, I'm going to ask you to marry me. I'm going to make you my wife." The storage room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Dalla's vision narrowed to pinpoints. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Gunnar was kind and foolish and blind, but not this. Blind. "No." The word ripped out of her. "No, you're not thinking clearly. The grief has— I've been thinking clearly for 3 years." Gunnar grabbed her hands, holding them between his larger, calloused palms. "I love you, Dalla. I have loved you since the summer you helped me carry my father from the harbor when he'd drunk himself senseless, and you never told anyone, never used it as leverage. Since you taught me to find peace in small things, to see strength and gentleness, you're the only person who sees me as I am and doesn't find me lacking." Tears burned hot tracks down her cheeks. Everything she'd carefully buried, every dangerous feeling she'd strangled before it could grow, erupted in her chest like a festering wound finally lanced. "I love you too," she choked out, and watched something like joy break across his face. "I love you so much it terrifies me. But Gunnar, that's exactly why I can't marry you. That's why this can never happen." The joy died. Confusion replaced it, then hurt so raw it felt obscene to witness. "You just said you love me, and marrying you would destroy you." Her voice gained strength even as her heart splintered. "A Jarl wedding a freed thrall? They'll see it as madness, as weakness, as proof you're unfit to lead. Ragnhild will use it to take power from you. The Carls will rebel. Everything your family built will crumble because of me. I don't care about— I care." The words echoed off the storage room's walls. "I care because I won't be the reason you lose everything. I won't be the chain that drowns you. So no, Gunnar Eriksson, I won't marry you. I won't accept my freedom if that's the price." She pulled her hands from his and ran before he could see her completely break apart, ran before she could change her mind and doom them both. Behind her, she heard him call her name, anguished and desperate, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She didn't see Ragnhild step out from behind the stable wall, didn't see the calculating look that crossed the woman's face as she processed everything she'd just overheard. Dalla just ran, the iron collar cold and familiar around her neck, her heart shattered into pieces she'd never be able to gather again. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a Carl whose face carried the blank efficiency of a man who'd learned not to question orders. Dalla was scrubbing blood from butchering stones when he found her. her hands already raw from the icy water and lye soap. "You're wanted in the Great Hall." Immediately, her stomach turned to ice. She'd spent the night hiding in the thrall quarters, pressing her face into rough wool bedding to muffle the sounds of her crying. The other slaves had given her space, their silence heavy with questions they knew better than to ask. Now, as weak morning light filtered through gaps in the longhouse walls, she understood her small act of defiance had consequences. She just hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly. The great hall buzzed with unusual activity for such an early hour. Carls lined the walls, their weathered faces serious. At the high table sat Ragnhild, her posture perfect, her dark hair braided with silver threads that caught the firelight. She looked like she'd been carved from stone, beautiful and unmovable. Gunnar stood beside her, but something about him had changed overnight. His shoulders curved inward. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked diminished, like a man who'd aged 10 years in the space of one terrible night. He wouldn't meet Dalla's gaze as she entered. Ragnhild stood, and the hall fell silent. "Dalla, thrall of this household, step forward." Dalla's legs moved without her permission, carrying her across the packed earth floor until she stood before the high table. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she tasted copper on her tongue. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to run to. She was property. She'd always been property. "Yesterday," Ragnhild began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "my brother, in his grief over our father's impending death, made a grave error in judgment. He offered you freedom and proposed marriage. Is this true?" The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Dalla's throat closed. Around her she heard the sharp intake of breath from the assembled carls, the rustle of bodies shifting in shock and disgust. A jarl marrying a thrall. The very suggestion violated every social boundary their world was built upon. "Answer the question," Ragnhild commanded, and steel threaded through her cultured voice. "He did," Dalla whispered, then forced herself to speak louder. "But I refused him." Surprise flickered across Ragnhild's face, quickly masked. She'd expected denial, maybe, or defiant confirmation. Not this. "You refused your freedom. You refused to become lady of this household." "I refused because I understood what it would cost." Dalla lifted her chin, meeting Ragnhild's sharp gaze. Directly. A thrall wasn't supposed to look a free person in the eye, but she'd already crossed so many lines that one more hardly mattered. "I refused because I care about his future more than my own comfort." Something complicated moved behind Ragnhild's expression. Respect, maybe, or calculation. Perhaps both. "How noble," she said, but the word carried thorns. "Unfortunately, your refusal doesn't erase the offense. My brother's proposal itself reveals dangerous weakness. It shows he values personal desire over clan stability. It proves he cannot separate his feelings from his duty as Jarl." Gunnar flinched as if she'd struck him. "Ragnhild, please." She said no. "Nothing happened. There's no need to. There's every need." Ragnhild turned to her brother, and Dalla saw genuine pain flash across her face before it hardened back into resolve. "Father isn't even dead yet, and you're already making choices that would destroy us. Do you think our enemies won't hear about this? Do you think they won't use it as proof that you're unfit to lead?" She gestured to the assembled carls. "These men need a jarl who puts the clan first. Always, without exception." One of the older carls, a man named Torstein with a scar bisecting his left cheek, cleared his throat. "The Lady Ragnhild speaks truth. A jarl who cannot control his own desires, cannot control a household, cannot control warriors, cannot make the hard choices that keep us alive through winter and war." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Dalla watched Gunnar's face crumble, watched him realize how thoroughly his sister had outmaneuvered him. This wasn't just about stopping a foolish marriage. This was about proving his incompetence before he'd even officially inherited power. "So what do you propose?" Gunnar's voice came out hollow, defeated. Ragnhild's eyes glittered. The thrall must be punished. Publicly. To show that you understand the severity of what almost occurred, even if it was your weakness. That caused it. To prove you can make difficult decisions. She paused, letting the words sink in. She refused you, brother. In our laws, that's an insult to your honor. She must be disciplined accordingly. Dala's blood turned to slush in her veins. She understood now. This wasn't about justice. This was about breaking Gunnar's spirit, about forcing him to hurt the one person he loved to prove his fitness to rule. It was brilliant and monstrous in equal measure. No. Gunnar's hands clenched, into fists at his sides. I won't do it. She did nothing wrong. If anything, she saved me from my own stupidity. Then you confirm what everyone suspects. Ragnhild's voice softened, but the words cut deeper for their gentleness. You're too weak to lead. You value one thrall's well-being over the respect of your people, and if you can't even discipline your own property, how can you discipline warriors? How can you make the ruthless choices that leadership demands? The Carls shifted, uncomfortably. Dala could feel the mood in the room changing, consensus forming around Ragnhild's logic, like ice crystallizing across a pond's surface. They needed to believe their new Jarl could be strong. They needed proof he could set aside his heart when duty required it. Gunnar looked at Dala then, really looked at her, and she saw the exact moment he understood the trap. If he protected her, he lost everything. If he punished her, he betrayed everything that made him who he was. There was no winning move, no escape. Dala made the choice for him. I accept punishment, she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. I spoke to the Jarl's son in private without permission. I allowed him to touch my hands. I didn't immediately report his intentions to his family. These are my failures, and I will bear the consequences. She was giving him permission, giving him a way out that wouldn't completely destroy him. If she claimed guilt, he could punish her and maintain face. It would hurt. Gods, it would hurt. But they would both survive. Gunnar's face went white. Dala, don't. 10 lashes, Ragnhild announced, her voice ringing with finality. Delivered by you, brother, in the courtyard at midday, so everyone can witness that you understand what it means to be Jarl, that you can set aside personal weakness for the good of all. The words fell like stones into dark water, sending ripples through the assembled crowd. 10 lashes. Dala had seen thralls receive that punishment before. Some never fully recovered. The scars lasted forever, thick and ropey across the back. But she'd also seen thralls receive far worse for far less. She could survive 10 lashes. She could survive knowing Gunnar's hand delivered them. What she couldn't survive was watching him lose everything because he'd been foolish enough to love her. At midday then, Dala heard herself say, and her voice didn't shake. I'll be ready. Gunnar made a sound like a wounded animal, but Ragnhild's hand on his arm stopped whatever protest he'd been about to make. The hall began to empty, Carls filing out to spread word of the spectacle to come. Dala turned to leave, to prepare herself mentally for what was ahead, but Gunnar's anguished whisper caught her. I'm sorry. Gods, Dala, I'm so sorry. She didn't turn around, couldn't turn around. If she looked at his face, at the devastation she knew would be written there, her resolve would shatter. Don't be sorry, she said, quietly. Just survive this. Survive and lead them well. That's all I want. Then she walked out into the cold morning air, each step measured and steady, even as everything inside her screamed. The courtyard filled slowly, deliberately, like blood seeping into cloth. Dala stood in the center, wrists bound to a wooden post that had seen this purpose too many times before. Dark stains marked the wood where others had bled. She pressed her forehead against the rough surface, breathing through her nose, trying to find stillness in the chaos of her thoughts. Behind her, the crowd murmured, not the excited buzz of entertainment, but something heavier, uncertain. The other thralls clustered together near the kitchen entrance, their faces drawn with fear and sympathy. They understood this could be any of them tomorrow. The free folk spread throughout the courtyard, some curious, some uncomfortable. all waiting to see if their new Jarl had the spine to do what needed doing. Dala's hands trembled against the rope binding them. She clenched her fists, forcing steadiness into her limbs through sheer will. Pain was temporary. She'd survived worse. The raiders who'd killed her father and dragged her from her burning village when she was 10 had taught her that bodies could endure more than minds believed possible. She just had to disconnect, to float somewhere above herself until it was over. Footsteps approached from behind, heavy, reluctant. She knew Gunnar's walk as well as her own heartbeat, the slight hesitation in his left foot from an old training injury. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of his body against her back, close enough to hear his ragged breathing. Dala. Her name came out broken. I don't know if I can do this. She wanted to turn, to look at him, to offer comfort. But the ropes held her fast, and maybe that was better. You can, she whispered, low enough that only he would hear. You have to. They're all watching, Gunnar. Your sister made sure of that. She's punishing me, not you. She knows the only way to truly hurt me is through you. Then don't give her that satisfaction. Dala's voice gained strength despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Whatever you're about to do to my body, you can't touch what matters. You can't touch what I feel for you. She can't take that away unless we let her. A shuddering breath escaped him. She heard the soft rasp of leather being drawn, the whip uncoiling. Her back muscles tensed involuntarily, body preparing for trauma before her mind could catch up. The crowd's murmuring died to absolute silence. Ragnhild's voice cut through the stillness. 10 lashes for disrespecting the Jarl's son, for allowing improper intimacy, for not knowing her place. Each word precisely chosen, each one reinforcing the narrative she'd constructed. Dala the seductress, Gunnar the victim of thrall manipulation. It was a lie, but lies told loudly enough became truth. Begin, Ragnhild commanded. Nothing happened. The silence stretched so long that Dala heard a raven call from the longhouse roof, harsh and mocking. She pressed her forehead harder against the post, splinters catching in her skin. Come on, Gunnar, don't make this harder than it has to be. I said begin. Ice threaded through Ragnhild's second command. The first strike came without warning. Dala's entire world exploded into white-hot agony that ripped the breath from her lungs. The thin wool of her dress provided no protection. Fire traced across her shoulder blades, so intense she couldn't even scream, just gasped like a fish drowning in air. Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. He'd held back. She could tell even through the pain. That strike should have split skin, should have drawn blood immediately. Gunnar had pulled it, softened it, tried to make it bearable, and that kindness might destroy them both. Harder. Ragnhild's voice carried no warmth, no mercy. Or do you need someone else to finish what you're too weak to do? Dala heard Gunnar's anguished sound behind her. I'm sorry, he breathed, so quiet only she could catch it. Forgive me. The second strike landed with proper force. This time Dala did scream, a raw sound torn from somewhere deep in her chest. The leather bit through fabric and skin, opening a line of fire across her back. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Her vision blurred, the courtyard swimming in and out of focus. 3, 4, 5, each. Impact drove the air from her lungs, each one layered new agony over the last until she couldn't distinguish individual wounds anymore. Just one continuous sea of pain. Her legs gave out on the sixth strike, leaving her hanging from the wrist bindings, rope cutting into already abraded skin. Warm wetness soaked through her dress, blood running in rivulets down her back. Somewhere far away, she heard someone retching. One of the younger thralls, maybe, unable to stomach the spectacle. Or perhaps her own body trying to rebel, trying to reject what was happening to it. She forced herself to stay conscious, to not give Ragnhild the satisfaction of seeing her collapse completely. 7, 8. The world narrowed to the post in front of her face, to the rough wood grain swimming in her tear-blurred vision, to the copper taste of blood in her mouth. She could hear Gunnar behind her, his breathing harsh and ragged, each strike clearly destroying him as thoroughly as it destroyed her. 9 came. Down across already torn flesh. Dalla's scream choked off into a sob. Just one more. Just one more, and this would be over. She could survive one more. But the 10th strike didn't come. The silence stretched. Dalla hung from the post, every breath sending fresh waves of agony through her shredded back. She heard the whip fall to the ground, heard Gunner's footsteps stumbling away, heard his voice, thick with tears, say, "I can't, I won't, not again." "You have one more," Ragnhild said, and Dalla could hear the satisfaction creeping into her tone. This was the moment she'd engineered. Proof of Gunner's weakness delivered publicly, undeniably. "Then, I forfeit." Gunner's words rang clear, despite the emotion choking them. "I cannot deliver that last strike. I will not. If that makes me unfit to lead, so be it." The courtyard erupted in murmurs. Dalla forced her eyes open, forced her head to turn enough to see. Gunner stood with his back to her, facing the assembled crowd, facing his sister. His hands shook violently at his sides. His face was wet with tears he'd made no attempt to hide. Ragnhild stood frozen, clearly not having anticipated this move. She'd expected him to complete the punishment, to prove he could be cruel when necessary. Or she'd expected him to refuse from the beginning, to protect Dalla openly and lose all respect. But this middle path, this completion of 9 lashes followed by public refusal on the 10th, this was something different, something she hadn't planned for. It showed he could be harsh when required, but it also showed limits to that harshness, boundaries he wouldn't cross. Torstein, the scarred Carl, stepped forward. He did 9 of 10. That's enough to prove he understands discipline. The last strike withheld shows mercy, not weakness. A Jarl needs both. Other Carls nodded slowly, considering. Dalla saw calculation in their faces, saw them weighing what they'd witnessed. Ragnhild's expression darkened, her perfectly laid trap. Suddenly uncertain. "Cut her down," Gunner said quietly. "Get the healer. Treat her wounds properly." 2 thralls rushed forward. One of them, old Bergdis, who'd been kind to Dalla when she first arrived. Gentle hands untied the ropes. The moment they loosened, Dalla's legs gave out completely. She would have hit the ground if Bergdis hadn't caught her, easing her down carefully to avoid her destroyed back. "Brave girl," Bergdis whispered, cradling Dalla's head. "Foolish, brave girl." Through the haze of pain, Dalla watched Gunner walk toward the longhouse, his shoulders rigid, his steps mechanical. He didn't look back, couldn't look back, and she understood that too. Understood he was barely holding himself together. Ragnhild stood alone in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by Carls whose expressions ranged from thoughtful to approving. She'd wanted to prove Gunner too weak. Instead, she'd given him an opportunity to show something more complex, more human. But as Dalla's vision started to fade at the edges, shock pulling her under, she caught the look on Ragnhild's face. This wasn't over, not by a long way. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Ragnhild's voice, cold and precise. "Take her to the thrall quarters. Make sure she survives. We're not done with her yet." Fever came on the 3rd night. Dalla drifted in and out of consciousness, her back a landscape of fire that no amount of salve could cool. Bergdis changed the bandages twice daily, her weathered hands as gentle as circumstances allowed, but infection had already taken root in 2 of the deeper wounds. The thrall quarters smelled of sweat and herbs and the sickly sweet rot of damaged flesh. Through the delirium, Dalla caught fragments of conversation. Jarl Eriksson had finally died, his labored breathing ceasing in the gray hours before dawn. The funeral preparations consumed the household. Gunnar would be officially named Jarl at the ceremony 3 days hence, when his father's body would be sent to sea in a burning ship, accompanied by enough grave goods to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. She should have felt something about the old Jarl's death. Sorrow, perhaps, or relief that his suffering had ended. But pain swallowed every other emotion, leaving room for nothing else. She existed in a shrinking world, bounded by the rough wool beneath her cheek and the agony radiating from her back. On the 4th night, when the moon hung full and silver beyond the small window, The door creaked open. Dalla's eyes fluttered, expecting Bergdus with more willow bark tea. Instead, a darker shape moved through the shadows, too tall and broad to be the old woman. Gunnar knelt beside her sleeping pallet, and even through the fever haze, Dalla saw how grief had carved him hollow. His father's death sat heavy on his shoulders, visible in the way he moved, in the darkness circling his eyes. He wore simple clothes, not the fine tunics expected of a Jarl's son. His hands trembled as they hovered over her, afraid to touch, afraid to cause more pain. "You shouldn't be here," Dalla whispered, her throat raw and dry. "If someone sees... Everyone's at the funeral vigil. I slipped away. I had to..." His voice cracked. "I had to see you, to know if you'd survive what I did to you." Dalla tried to smile and managed only a grimace. "Takes more than 9 lashes to kill me, though the fever's giving it a solid attempt." Gunnar's face crumpled. He pressed his palms against his eyes as if he could physically push back the tears threatening to spill. "I dream about it. Every time I close my eyes, I hear your screams. I feel the whip in my hand. I see the blood." A shuddering breath escaped him. "My father just died, and all I can think about is what I did to you. What kind of monster does that make me? The kind who's been forced into an impossible situation." Dalla shifted, trying to reach for him, and white-hot pain lanced through her back. She bit down on a cry, breathing hard through her nose until the worst passed. "Your father's death isn't your fault. Neither is this. Ragnhild orchestrated everything. She's trying to protect the clan." Gunnar's words came out mechanical, like he'd repeated them to himself 1,000 times, trying to believe them. "She thinks I'm too weak to lead. Maybe she's right. She's right that you're not like other Jarls." Dalla forced the words out despite the pain, despite the exhaustion dragging at her. "You're not brutal or ruthless. You value mercy over dominance. But Gunnar, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you different. The question is whether your people will accept different." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "How do you do that? How do you comfort me when you're the one lying here with wounds I put on your back? Because I love you, you idiot." The words slipped out, unguarded and raw. "And love means wanting the other person to survive, even when survival costs you everything." Gunnar leaned forward, his forehead nearly touching hers, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. "When you're healed, I'm freeing you. Ragnhild can't stop me. I'll claim it's compensation for the punishment. Say it's tradition. Then you can leave this place. Go somewhere you're not property. Start over." Every part of Dalla wanted to say yes, to grab that offer with both hands and never let go. Freedom. The word tasted like honey and ash on her tongue. But even through the fever, she understood the trap hidden in that kindness. "And everyone will know why you freed me. They'll see it as proof you can't let me go. That you're still making decisions based on your feelings for a thrall. It'll undermine everything. I don't care anymore." The words came out fierce, desperate. "I can't keep sacrificing you to prove myself worthy of a position I never wanted. Let Ragnhild be Jarl. Let her have the power and the responsibility. I'll be a farmer, a fisherman, anything else, as long as you're free and safe. And what happens when she marries you off to seal some alliance?" Dalla's voice gained strength despite her body's weakness. "What happens when she uses you as a political tool because you gave up the only power that could protect you? You think she'll let you live quietly? She'll leverage you until there's nothing left." The truth of it settled over them like a shroud. There was no escape, no simple solution. As long as Gunnar was Jarl, Dalla's presence endangered him. If he gave up being Jarl, he became vulnerable in different ways. They were trapped in a web Ragnhild had woven expertly, every strand pulling tighter the more they struggled. "Then what do we do?" Gunnar's question came out small, broken. "How do we survive this?" Before Dalla could answer, the door flew open. Ragnhild stood framed in the entrance, a lamp held high, its light spilling across the small room. Her face was composed, unsurprised. She'd known Gunnar was here. Of course she'd known. She probably orchestrated his opportunity to slip away just so she could catch him like this. The vigil for our father, and you're here. Ragnhild's voice dripped disappointment. Do you understand how this looks? The Karls are at the Longhouse, honoring the man who built everything we have, and the future Jarl sneaks off to comfort his thrall lover. Gunnar scrambled to his feet. I was checking on her condition. The wounds I inflicted were necessary discipline that you couldn't even complete. Ragnhild stepped into the room, her presence filling it entirely. And now you're here in the middle of the night, alone with her, proving every suspicion anyone has ever had. Brother, you're making this too easy. Dalla forced herself upright despite the screaming agony in her back. She needed to see clearly to understand what was coming. What do you want, Ragnhild? Ragnhild's gaze shifted to her, sharp and assessing. For a long moment, she studied Dalla with an expression that wasn't quite hatred, wasn't quite respect, but something complicated between the two. I want my family to survive. I want the clan to thrive. And I want my brother to stop throwing everything away for someone he can never truly have. Then let me leave. Dalla heard herself say it before she'd fully formed the thought. Free me. Send me away. I'll go far enough that no one will ever connect me to this household again. Problem solved. You think it's that simple? Ragnhild's laugh held no humor. You think he won't pine after you? Won't make foolish decisions because he's mourning your absence? No, sending you away solves nothing. You're a wound that will fester no matter how far you travel. So what then? Gunnar demanded. You want me to sell her? Have her killed? Tell me what would finally satisfy you. Ragnhild's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Dalla saw genuine pain flicker behind her eyes. I want you to be the leader our father believed you could become. I want you to put the clan first. I want... She paused, something vulnerable crossing her face before she locked it away. I want my little brother back, the one who used to laugh, who wrote poems about summer storms and snow falling on the fjord, before she complicated everything. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush them all. Dalla understood then. This wasn't just about power or politics. Ragnhild had lost her brothers to war, lost her father to sickness, and now watched the last family member she had drowned himself in an impossible love. She was trying to save him the only way she knew how, even if her methods were brutal. But understanding didn't make the situation any less impossible. Ragnhild straightened, the vulnerability vanishing behind her usual mask of control. Tomorrow, after the funeral, there will be a gathering of the Karls. They'll officially name you Jarl, and you will stand before them and swear that your personal desires will never compromise your duty to the clan. You'll swear it publicly, binding yourself by oath. And if I refuse? Gunnar's voice was hollow. Then I'll call for a vote to replace you before you're even officially named. Ragnhild met his eyes. And I'll win, brother. You know I will. She turned and walked out, leaving the lamp behind. Its light flickered across the walls, casting dancing shadows that looked like the flames that would consume their fathers. Body come morning. Gunnar sank back down beside Dalla's pallet, his head in his hands. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that could change what was coming. The funeral pyre blazed against the gray dawn sky, flames consuming Jarl Eriksson's body and the small ship that carried him. Dalla watched from the thrall quarters window, too weak to stand for long, but unable to look away. Smoke rose in thick black columns, carrying the old Jarl's spirit toward whatever awaited beyond. The gathered crowd stood silent, faces painted orange by firelight, honoring a man who'd ruled with an iron fist wrapped in pragmatic fairness. Gunnar stood at the water's edge, closest to the flames, his face unreadable from this distance. Ragnhild positioned herself slightly behind and to his right. The perfect picture of supportive sister, but Dalla had learned to read the space between people, the silent language of power and control. Ragnhild's placement wasn't deference, it was a claim. Declaration that she stood ready to catch him when he inevitably stumbled. Bergdis appeared with more willow bark tea and fresh bandages. You should be resting, child. Watching won't change anything. I need to see. Dalla lowered herself carefully back onto the pallet, biting back a gasp as the movement pulled at healing wounds. The fever had broken 2 days ago, leaving her weak but clear-headed enough to understand how thoroughly trapped they all were. When does the gathering happen? This afternoon, once the funeral feast is done. Bergdis began unwrapping the old bandages with practiced efficiency. The Carls will formally name Gunnar as Jarl. There's talk of the oath Ragnhild demanded. Some say it's unnecessary. Others think it's wise given. She trailed off, uncomfortable finishing the thought. Given his weakness for a thrall? Dalla supplied bitterly. You can say it, Bergdis. Everyone else does. The old woman's hands stilled. I was going to say given his youth and the difficult times ahead, but yes, your situation has tongues wagging. She resumed her work, peeling away cloth stuck to skin with dried blood and salve. For what it's worth, I think you did a brave thing. Refusing him, trying to save him from himself. Brave or foolish, I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. Dalla stared at the ceiling's rough wooden beams, counting the knots in the wood to distract from the pain as Bergdis cleaned her wounds. He's going to take that oath. Swear away any chance we had, and I'm going to have to watch him do it. You don't have to watch anything. You're injured, confined to quarters. No one expects you there. But Dalla knew she'd be there. Ragnhild would make sure of it. This wasn't just about Gunnar taking an oath. It was about making Dalla witness it, about driving home the finality of what could never be. Ragnhild understood that the cruelest punishments didn't mark the body. They marked the soul. The afternoon arrived too. Quickly, 2 Carls appeared at the thrall quarters, their faces professionally blank. You're summoned to the Great Hall, Lady Ragnhild's orders. Dalla had expected this, but expectation didn't make it easier. She stood carefully, wearing a clean dress Bergdis had found for her. The fabric hung loose, hiding the bandages wrapped around her torso, hiding the destruction underneath. Each step toward the longhouse sent small shocks of pain through her back, but she kept her face composed. She'd learned that skill well over 12 years of captivity. Never let them see how much they've hurt you. The great hall overflowed with people. Every Carl who owed allegiance to the household had come, along with their wives and older children. Thralls lined the walls, required witnesses to their master's ascension. The air smelled of roasted meat and ale, the funeral feast still evident in picked-over platters and half-empty cups. But the mood had shifted from mourning to anticipation. Dalla was directed to stand near the back, close to the other thralls, but separate. Marked. Everyone's eyes found her as she entered, tracking her movement across the hall. She heard the whispers, saw the mixture of pity and disgust, and morbid curiosity on their faces. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale walking among them. Gunnar stood at the high table, and when his gaze found hers across the crowded room, something inside him visibly cracked. She saw him start to move toward her, saw the instinct to go to her, override everything else. But Ragnhild's hand landed on his arm, stopping him with a grip that looked gentle from a distance, but Dalla knew was iron hard. Let's begin, Ragnhild announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. We gather to name Gunnar Eriksson as Jarl, to accept his leadership and pledge our loyalty. Torstein stepped forward, the scarred Carl who'd spoken in Gunnar's defense after the whipping. Before we proceed, there's the matter of the oath. Lady Ragnhild has suggested our new Jarl swear that personal desires will not compromise his duty to the clan. Some question if such an oath is necessary. It's necessary, called out another Carl, younger, his face flushed with ale. We all saw what almost happened. We need assurance it won't happen again. Agreements rippled through the crowd, but also dissent. Dalla watched the room divide itself, watched people choose sides in a conflict they only partially understood. Some defended Gunnar's right to privacy in personal matters. Others insisted a Jarl's personal life was always political. The debate grew heated, voices rising, hands gesturing emphatically. Through it all, Gunnar stood silent. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight Dalla could see the muscle jumping. He looked like a man preparing for execution, and in a way, he was. The oath Ragnhild demanded would kill the part of him that hoped, that dreamed, that believed love could somehow triumph over duty. Enough. Gunnar's voice cut through the arguing, not loud, but carrying weight that silenced the room. I'll take the oath, not because my sister demands it or because you question my fitness. I'll take it because leadership requires sacrifice, because a Jarl who cannot set aside personal desire for the greater good is not worthy of the position. He lifted his right hand, and Dalla felt something inside her chest begin to tear. This was it. The moment they'd been hurtling toward since that terrible conversation in the storage room. The moment everything became irrevocable. I, Gunnar Eriksson, swear before these witnesses and before the gods that I will place the clan's welfare above all personal considerations. That I will make decisions based on what strengthens our people, not what pleases my own heart. That I will marry as alliance requires, lead as duty demands, and sacrifice whatever I must for the survival of those under my protection. Each word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples that would never settle. Dalla's vision blurred. She pressed her back against the wall, not caring about the pain it caused, needing something solid to hold her upright. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? For him to choose duty over her. For him to be the leader his people needed. So why did it feel like watching him die? Furthermore, Gunnar continued, and his voice finally cracked, I swear that I will not pursue, propose to, or privately consort with any thrall in this household. I will maintain appropriate distance and will make decisions regarding thrall welfare based solely on household needs, not personal attachment. The last part was Ragnhild's addition. Dalla knew it without being told. It wasn't enough for Gunnar to promise general duty over desire. Ragnhild wanted specific, explicit renunciation, wanted to carve away the possibility of Dalla with legal precision. Do you witness this oath? Ragnhild asked the assembled crowd. We witness, came the response, dozens of voices merging into one judgment. Then I name you Jarl. Ragnhild placed their father's arm ring on Gunnar's bicep, the silver gleaming in the firelight. Lead us well, brother. The hall erupted in cheers and stamping feet. Ale was poured. Toasts were made. People crowded forward to pledge loyalty, to curry favor with the new Jarl, to secure their positions in the hierarchy. Dalla watched it all from her corner, invisible again now that the spectacle was over. Gunnar accepted congratulations. Mechanically, his face a mask that showed nothing. But Dalla knew him too well. She saw the death behind his eyes, the way he'd locked away everything that made him who he was and replaced it with the shell of what everyone needed him to be. This was her fault. Her refusal had set all of this in motion. If she'd just accepted exile, accepted some other solution, maybe it wouldn't have come to this. Maybe he wouldn't have had to publicly kill the part of himself that loved her. She turned to, leave, unable to watch anymore, when Ragnhild appeared beside her. The woman moved like a cat, silent and purposeful. Stay, she said quietly. We're not finished. Dalla's stomach dropped. What more could you possibly want? Not want. Need. Ragnhild gestured toward a small side room off the main hall. We need to talk, privately. Every instinct screamed at Dalla to refuse, to run, but where would she run to? She was property. A thrall had no rights, no recourse, no escape. She followed. Ragnhild into the side room, the sounds of celebration muffling as the door closed behind them. Ragnhild studied her in the dimmer light, and for the first time, Dalla saw something like respect in those calculating eyes. You love him, truly love him, not his position or potential freedom, just him. It wasn't a question, but Dalla answered anyway. Yes. Then you understand why what I'm about to propose is necessary. Ragnhild moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I'm sending you away, tomorrow, to a trading settlement 3 days north. I'm selling you to a merchant who needs household slaves. You'll never see Gunnar again. The room tilted. Dalla grabbed the wall for support. You can't. I can. I'm acting as Jarl's sister, managing household assets. Gunnar just swore he wouldn't interfere in thrall decisions based on personal attachment. He bound himself with that oath. Ragnhild's face held no triumph, just grim determination. This is the only way. As long as you're here, he'll never fully commit to leadership. He'll always be looking for you, thinking about you, dying slowly from wanting what he can't have. So you're being merciful? Dalla's voice dripped bitterness. Tearing me away from the only home I remember, selling me like livestock. But it's mercy? No. Ragnhild met her eyes directly. It's necessity. Mercy would be letting you stay and watching you both destroy yourselves. This is simply the least terrible option in a situation with no good choices. Dawn arrived gray and cold, mist rolling off the fjord in thick waves that swallowed the world beyond 20 paces. Dalla stood in the courtyard with her few possessions bundled in a rough cloth sack, waiting for the merchant who would cart her north to a life among strangers. Her back still ached with each breath, the wounds not fully healed, but Ragnhild had deemed her healthy enough to travel, healthy enough to be erased from Gunnar's life. Bergdis had wept when she said, "Goodbye," pressing a small packet of herbs into Dalla's hands. "For the pain, for bad dreams, for whatever comes." The old woman's voice had broken on the last words, and Dalla had held her tightly, memorizing the feeling of being cared for by someone who expected nothing in return. Now she waited alone, watching the longhouse door, knowing he wouldn't come. Gunnar had spent the night locked in the Jarl's private chamber, reportedly reviewing accounts and trade agreements, learning the responsibilities he'd inherited. But Dalla knew the truth. Ragnhild had made sure he was occupied, made sure he couldn't interfere even if his oath allowed it. The merchant arrived on a sturdy cart, pulled by 2 oxen, their breath steaming in the cold air. He was a thick man with calculating eyes and hands permanently stained from handling furs and leather goods. He looked Dalla over like livestock, checking her teeth, examining her hands for signs of disease or weakness. She stood still and let him, swallowing the rage and humiliation that burned in her throat. "She's recovering from discipline," Ragnhild said smoothly, materializing from the mist like a vengeful spirit. "But the wounds are clean. She'll be fully healed within 2 weeks. Strong worker, knows household management, can read basic runes." The merchant grunted. "That adds value. I'll take her." He counted out silver pieces into Ragnhild's palm, the clink of metal sealing Dalla's fate with business-like efficiency. "Get in." "The cart, girl. We leave immediately." Dalla climbed into the cart bed, settling among barrels of salted fish and bundles of wool. The wood was rough and splintered beneath her, and every jolt would be agony for her back. But she'd endured worse. She'd survive this too. She had to. The cart lurched forward. The settlement began to slip away into the mist, familiar buildings becoming ghosts. Then memories, then nothing. Dalla kept her eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look back, refusing to give. Ragnhild the satisfaction of seeing her grief. But then a figure burst from the longhouse, running toward the cart with desperate speed. Even through the mist, Dalla recognized Gunnar's shape, his stride, the way he moved. Her heart seized. "Stop!" His voice carried across the courtyard. "Stop the cart!" The merchant reined in the oxen, confusion and annoyance warring on his face. Gunnar reached them, breathing hard, his hair wild like he'd been pulling at it. He wore yesterday's clothes, wrinkled and askew. His eyes were red-rimmed and fevered. "You can't take her." He grabbed the cart's side, knuckles white. "I'm buying her back. Name your price." The merchant looked between Gunnar and Ragnhild, clearly sensing complicated currents he wanted no part of. "My Jarl, the transaction is complete. The silver is paid. By law. I'm the Jarl. I can override any transaction in this settlement." Gunnar's voice shook, but held authority. "Name your price." "Brother." Ragnhild appeared beside him, her face carefully neutral. "You swore an oath before the gods and our people. You promised not to interfere in thrall matters based on personal attachment. This isn't personal. This is justice. Gunnar turned to face her, and Dalla saw wild desperation in his eyes. She's being sold while still injured. That's cruelty. Any jarl worth his position wouldn't allow a wounded slave to be carted north on rough roads. It has nothing to do with who she is to me. It was a thin justification, transparent as spring ice, and everyone knew it. But Dalla saw the brilliance in it too. He'd found a loophole in his own oath, a way to frame his actions as duty rather than desire. The question was whether anyone would accept it. Thorstein emerged from the longhouse, drawn by the commotion. Several other carls followed, all watching with varying degrees of concern and interest. This was the first test of their new jarl's judgment, and everyone understood the weight of it. The girl's wounds are healing clean? The merchant protested. I've transported slaves in worse condition. This is unreasonable. Let me see. Thorstein approached the cart, his scarred face thoughtful. If she's unfit to travel, the jarl is right to intervene. If she's well enough, the transaction stands. Dalla's heart hammered. She could lie, could claim her injuries were worse than they were, could give Gunnar the justification he needed, but that would only delay the inevitable. Ragnhild would find another buyer, another way to separate them, and Gunnar would be forced to either interfere again, breaking his oath more obviously, or watch her be sold a second time. She made her choice. I'm fit to travel. Her voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. The wounds pain me, but they won't worsen from the journey. The jarl's concern is appreciated but unnecessary. Gunnar's face drained of color. Dalla, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. You took an oath. You chose duty. Honor that choice. Don't destroy yourself trying to save me. I can't just let you go. His voice broke on the last word, raw and desperate. I can't watch you disappear, knowing I'll never see you again. Ragnhild stepped forward, her hand landing on Gunnar's shoulder. For once, her face showed genuine compassion alongside the steel. This is what leadership costs, brother. This is what you swore to accept. Sacrificing what you love most for what your people need. What they need is a jarl who's not dying inside. Gunnar shook off her hand. What good am I to them if I'm just a hollow shell going through the motions? You'll heal. Ragnhild's voice softened. It feels impossible now, but time will dull this. You'll find purpose in leadership, maybe even happiness eventually. You'll marry well, have children, build something meaningful, but only if you let her go. The gathered carls watched in silence. Dalla could see them processing this scene, weighing their new jarl's emotional display against his ultimate decision. If he forced the issue, bought her back, kept her close despite his oath, he'd prove every doubt about his fitness. If he let her go, he'd prove he could sacrifice personal desire for duty, but at what cost to his soul? Thorstein cleared his throat. My jarl, I speak as one who's served your family 3 decades. Your father faced choices like this. Every leader does. There's no shame in caring deeply. The shame comes only if that caring paralyzes you from doing what's necessary. And what's necessary? Gunnar's question came out hollow. Letting the only person who truly sees me vanish? Becoming exactly what everyone expects and losing who I actually am? Becoming who your people need you to be, Thorstein said gently. Even when it destroys who you want to be. Dalla felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot against cold skin. She'd thought the whipping was the worst pain she'd ever endure. She'd been catastrophically wrong. This was worse. Watching Gunnar break apart, knowing she was the reason, unable to do anything but witness his destruction. Gunnar. She forced his name past the tightness in her throat. Let me go. Please. If you ever loved me, honor what I tried to do when I refused you. Let me save you the only way I can. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched the war playing out behind his eyes. Love versus duty, heart versus responsibility, the man he was versus the leader he had to become. The moment stretched so thin it felt like the world might tear apart. Then his shoulders sagged. His hand fell from the cart. Go, he whispered. Before I change my mind. Before I damn us both." The merchant didn't wait for a second invitation. He snapped the reins, and the oxen lurched forward. The cart jolted into motion, each bump sending pain through Dalla's back. But she barely felt it. All she felt was the growing distance between her and the man standing frozen. In the courtyard, she turned to look back one final time. Gunnar stood with Ragnhild beside him, carls surrounding them both, the settlement's buildings framing them in gray mist. He raised one hand in farewell, or benediction, or surrender. Dalla couldn't tell which. Then the mist swallowed him, and he was gone. The cart rolled north through increasingly wild country. The merchant said nothing, focused on his oxen and his route. Dalla sat among his trade goods and wept silently, each tear a small, "oh," death, each mile a widening wound that would never fully close. She'd saved him. She'd done the right thing. She'd protected the man she loved from his own heart. So why did righteousness taste like ashes and grief? Hours passed. The sun climbed higher but never broke through the cloud cover. The world remained gray and cold and indifferent to human suffering. Dalla's tears eventually dried, leaving her hollow and exhausted. She dozed fitfully, dreams fragmenting into nonsense shapes and colors. She woke to the cart stopping. The merchant climbed down, stretching his back. "Rest break. There's a stream through those trees if you need water. Be quick." Dalla climbed down carefully, her body stiff and aching. She made her way through sparse forest to where she heard running water. The stream was narrow and cold, flowing fast over smooth stones. She knelt and cupped water to her mouth, drinking deeply, letting the cold shock her fully awake. When she straightened, she saw another figure. Approaching through the trees, a woman, tall and hooded, moving with purpose. Fear spiked through Dalla. Bandits sometimes worked these routes, robbing merchants and stealing slaves to sell elsewhere. But as the figure drew closer, the hood fell back. Ragnhild stood before her, breathing hard from rapid travel, her fine clothes streaked with mud from hard riding. "What are you doing here?" Dalla's voice came out sharp with suspicion and exhaustion. Ragnhild held up both hands, showing she carried no weapon. "Something you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you back there with everyone watching." She stepped closer, her face strained. "Your mother. When she was captured in that raid 12 years ago, she told me something before the fever took her." Dalla's world tilted. "You never knew my mother. You never spoke to her." "I did. Once. I was 14, bored, wandering the thrall quarters. She grabbed my hand and begged me to remember what she said. To tell you someday if circumstances ever required it." Ragnhild's eyes held no deception. "Your mother was nobility. Minor nobility from a settlement 3 days south, but nobility nonetheless. You weren't just any child stolen in a raid. You were ransom material. Your family tried to buy you back, but the message never reached you. My father intercepted it, refused payment. He wanted the labor. The world stopped making sense." Dalla grabbed a tree for support. "Why are you telling me this now? Because you're heading north to a trading settlement, and your mother's family still lives south, still searches for you. Or at least they did 5 years ago when I last heard." Ragnhild pressed a small leather pouch into Dalla's hand. "Enough silver to buy your freedom when you reach the settlement. Enough to travel south afterward if you choose. Consider it payment for saving my brother from himself. This doesn't make sense. You wanted me gone. You orchestrated everything. I wanted you away from Gunnar. Before you destroyed each other. That doesn't mean I wanted you enslaved forever." Ragnhild's face showed something complicated. "You loved him enough to refuse him. That takes strength I'm not sure I possess. You deserve a chance at freedom. Real freedom. Not just being sold to a different master." She turned to leave, then paused. "Don't come back. Even with this information, even if you're free, don't return to him. The wound is finally open and bleeding. Let it heal clean, not festering." Then she was gone, melting back into the forest like she'd never been there at all. Dalla stood alone by the stream, silver weighing heavy in her hand. her entire understanding of her own past crumbling and reforming into new shapes. She had family, she had origin, she had the means to escape, and Gunnar would never know any of it. 3 months passed like a slow-moving glacier, cold and inexorable. Dalla worked in the trading settlement under a merchant named Halvard who dealt in furs and amber. He was neither kind nor cruel, simply indifferent, which felt like mercy compared to what she'd known. The silver Ragnhild had given her remained hidden in the lining of her dress, a secret weight against her hip that represented possibility and torment in equal measure. Every day she told herself tomorrow would be the day she'd buy her freedom. Tomorrow she'd use the silver to become a free woman, to travel south and find the family her mother had spoken of with dying breath. Tomorrow, she'd start the life that had been stolen from her 12 years ago. But every tomorrow became today, and she couldn't make herself do it. Because freedom meant accepting that the chapter with Gunnar was truly finished. As long as she remained a slave, part of her could pretend circumstances kept them apart, not choice. The moment she became free and still didn't return to him, she'd be choosing this separation, making it real in a way she couldn't undo. The settlement perched on a cliff, overlooking a harbor that never fully froze, making it valuable for winter trade. Ships came and went carrying goods from distant lands. Dalla learned to recognize their origins by the cut of their sails. The languages shouted across decks, the smell of cargo holds. The world was larger than she'd ever imagined during her years confined to one household. She'd made an uneasy peace with one of the other slaves, a woman named Astrid who'd been captured from the Western Islands. Astrid had quick hands and a quicker tongue, always ready with observations that cut through pretense. "You're not like the others," she'd said one evening while they scraped hides. "You've got that look, like you're haunting your own life instead of living it." Dalla had no answer that didn't involve explaining everything, so she'd said nothing. The morning everything changed started ordinary enough. Cold spring rain drummed against the workshop roof while Dalla sorted amber pieces by size and quality. Her back had healed completely, leaving only faint scars that pulled slightly when she stretched. The physical wounds had closed. The others never would. Halvard burst into the workshop, water streaming from his cloak, his face flushed with excitement. "Ship just docked from the south. Big delegation, lot of silver flowing. They're looking for someone." He grabbed Dalla's arm, studying her face with sudden intensity. "How old are you?" 22, I think. Maybe 23. I lost count of winters." "And you were taken in a raid?" 12, 13 years ago." Dalla's heart began hammering. "Yes." "Why?" "Because there's a woman down at the harbor showing a drawing to anyone who'll look. Says she's searching for her stolen niece. Girl about your age who'd have been 10 or so when raiders hit her settlement." Halvard's grip tightened. "The resemblance is uncanny. Same coloring, same bone structure. If you're who she's looking for, there's a substantial reward for information." The workshop tilted. Dalla grabbed the table to stay upright, amber pieces scattering across the floor. Her family. After all this time, they were still searching, still hoping. The magnitude of it crushed the air from her lungs. "Take me to her," she whispered. Halvard hesitated, calculation clear on his face. "The reward for information is one thing, but if I bring you directly, prove you're the one they're seeking, the payment is triple." His eyes gleamed with the prospect. "Let's go, now, before someone else makes the connection." They half ran through the muddy settlement toward the harbor, Dalla's mind spinning. This was it. The moment Ragnhild's revelation became reality. She could reclaim her name, her history, her place in the world. Everything she'd lost could be restored. Everything except Gunnar. The harbor teemed with activity despite the rain. Workers loaded and unloaded cargo, merchants haggled prices, sailors shouted orders. But Dalla's attention fixed on a small group near the largest ship. A woman in fine clothes stood surrounded by guards, holding something flat and rectangular. Even from a distance, Dalla recognized nobility in her bearing, authority in the way people deferred to her. As they approached, the woman looked up. Her face was older than Dalla's mother's had been, but the resemblance struck like a physical blow. Same sharp cheekbones, same wide-set eyes, same determined set to the mouth. This was her mother's sister, her aunt, family, the woman's gaze. Locked on Dalla, and everything stopped. The drawing fell from her hands, landing in a puddle. She took 3 stumbling steps forward, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming. Dalla? The name came out broken, hopeful, terrified. Dalla, daughter of Ingrid and Harold? Hearing her parents' names after 12 years of silence shattered something inside her. Yes, Dalla choked out. I'm Dalla. Her aunt closed the distance and pulled her into an embrace so fierce it hurt. The woman smelled of lavender and wool and something indefinably familiar that Dalla's deepest memory recognized. We thought you were dead, her aunt sobbed against her hair. After 2 years of searching, we thought the raiders had killed you, but I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. Dalla clung to her, this stranger who was family, this connection to a past she'd almost forgotten. Around them, people stopped to watch, drawn by the raw emotion of the reunion. Halvard stood to the side, already counting the reward he'd receive in his head. Your father survived the raid, her aunt said, pulling back to look at Dalla properly, hands framing her face like she needed touch to confirm reality. He's alive, remarried. He never stopped grieving you, never stopped hoping we'd find you. He'll weep when he sees you again. Her father, alive. Dalla had spent 12 years believing both parents were dead, that she was truly alone. Learning her father had survived, had spent years searching, that he'd mourned her, wanted her back. It undid every defense she'd built around her heart. I want to see him, she whispered. I want to go home. Of course. We leave tomorrow at first light. Her aunt turned to Halvard. You'll be compensated handsomely for bringing her to us. Name your price for her freedom as well. Whatever you paid for her, triple it. I don't care about the cost. Halvard's eyes went wide. She's worth at least. I don't care, her aunt repeated, steel-yam, entering her voice. Triple whatever you paid. We're taking her home where she belongs. The transaction happened quickly, silver changing hands, papers drawn up confirming Dalla's change of status from slave to free woman. She watched it happen in a daze, unable to fully process the speed of her transformation. One moment she was property. The next, she was standing in spring rain as a free person with family who wanted her. That evening, her aunt, whose name was Sina, insisted on hosting a small celebration aboard the ship. Dalla wore borrowed clothes that fit properly, ate food she didn't have to serve, drank wine without needing permission. The other members of the delegation toasted her return, shared stories of her parents, painted pictures of a life she'd been too young to remember clearly. You'll have suitors lining up, Sina said warmly, refilling Dalla's cup. A woman of good family, even one returning from captivity, you'll make a fine match. Perhaps to someone who knew. You as a child who remembers your parents, a proper marriage, a chance to build the life that was stolen. The words landed like stones in deep water. Marriage, a proper life, everything she should want, everything that had been denied her for 12 years. She should feel joy, relief, excitement for this future opening before her. Instead, she felt Gunnar's absence like a missing limb. Later, when the celebration wound down and she was given a private cabin, Dalla stood at the small window, looking north. Somewhere in that direction, 3 days' travel through spring mud and melting snow, Gunnar was learning to be Jarl, learning to live with the choice they'd both made, learning to exist without her the way she was learning to exist without him. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She was free. She had family. She could build a life of dignity and purpose. Everything she'd dreamed about during the worst years of captivity had been handed to her. So why did it feel like she was about to make the worst mistake of her life? A knock at the cabin door interrupted her spiral. Sina entered, carrying a thick fur cloak. For the journey home, it'll be cold on the water. She paused, studying Dalla's face. You're not happy. I thought you'd be overjoyed. I am. I'm grateful beyond words for everything you've done, everything you're offering. Dalla struggled to find words that made sense even to herself. It's just, there's someone I left behind. Understanding dawned across Sina's face. A man. Someone you cared for in that household. The Jarl's son. Now the Jarl himself. Dalla sank onto the narrow bed. We loved each other. But I was a slave and he was about to become leader. There was no possible future. So I refused him. Refused freedom when he offered it because accepting would have destroyed him. And then I was sold north to save us both from slowly killing each other. Sina sat beside her, silent for a long moment. That's either the most selfless thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. Maybe both. Dalla's laugh came out bitter. I thought I was saving him, protecting him from his own feelings. But now I'm free, and I could return, and instead I'm sailing south to a family I barely remember, and a life that doesn't feel real. Do you regret the choice, refusing him? Dalla considered the question honestly. No. He needed to become Jarl without me as a complication. His people needed him whole and focused. I still believe that was right. She looked at her aunt. But that doesn't make it hurt less, and it doesn't tell me what I'm supposed to do now. Sina took Dalla's hand, her grip warm and solid. I can't make this choice for you. I want you to come home, to know your father again, to reclaim what was stolen. But I won't force you. You've spent 12 years without agency over your own life. I won't be another person telling you what you must do. If I go south, I'll never see him again. The distance is too great, the social divide too wide. I'll marry someone appropriate, build a proper life, and Gunnar will become a memory. Dalla's voice caught. If I go back north, I don't even know what I'm returning to. Maybe he's already moved on. Maybe seeing me will only reopen wounds that finally started healing. Maybe I'll destroy the very thing I sacrificed everything to protect. Or maybe, Sina said gently, you'll discover that some loves are worth fighting for, regardless of the obstacles. That protecting someone sometimes means standing beside them through difficulty, not running away to spare them pain. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, rain continued its steady drumming. The ship rocked gently in the harbor, ready to depart with the morning tide. South to family and restoration, or north to uncertainty and a man who'd sworn an oath to set aside his heart. Dalla closed her eyes and tried to imagine her life in 5 years, 10 years, 20. She saw 2 paths stretching before her, both leading to different versions of herself. One path showed comfort, propriety, a life rebuilt on the foundation of who she'd been before captivity. The other showed risk, complication, a future built on nothing but love and stubborn hope. Which woman did she want to become? The answer settled into her bones with quiet certainty, terrifying and absolute. She opened her eyes and looked at her aunt. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Anything. If you were me, if you'd spent 12 years having every choice stripped away, and then suddenly had the power to choose your own path, what would you do? Play it safe, or risk everything for something that might not even be possible? Sina smiled, sad and knowing. I'd already know the answer, and I'd be terrified to admit it even to myself. She squeezed Dalla's hand. The ship sails at dawn. If you're not aboard, I'll understand. Your father will understand too, eventually. We didn't search for 12 years just to trap you in expectations you don't want. After Sina left, Dalla sat alone in the cabin, weighing her future in her hands like the amber pieces she'd sorted that morning. She thought of Gunnar standing in the courtyard, watching her disappear into mist. She thought of his face when he'd taken that oath, killing part of himself to become what his people needed. She thought of 3 months of hollow days, moving through freedom without purpose, existing but not truly alive. And she thought of Ragnhild's final words. Don't come back. Let it heal clean. But some wounds weren't meant to heal. Some were meant to be felt, to be honored, to be transformed into something that made you stronger, rather than simply leaving you scarred. Dalla pulled out the silver Ragnhild had given her, adding it to the payment Sina had used to buy her freedom. She had resources now. She had choices. She had the power to determine her own fate for the first time in 12 years. The question was whether she had the courage to choose the terrifying path instead of the safe one. The ship sailed at dawn without her. Dalla stood on the cliff watching white sails grow smaller against gray water, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. Sina had embraced her one final time before boarding, pressing extra silver into her hands along with a carved wooden pendant. So you always remember you have family who loves you, wherever you choose to be. Now Dalla stood alone at the edge of everything she'd ever known, about to walk deliberately toward everything she feared. The journey south would take 3 days by cart. North, back to Gunnar's settlement, would take the same. She'd hired a guide with a horse, a weathered woman named Thora, who asked no questions and expected no explanations. They would leave within the hour. Dalla had written a letter to her father, paying a scribe in the settlement to make the words beautiful and clear. She'd explained everything: the years of captivity, the impossible love, the choice she was making. She'd told him she hoped someday to visit, to know him again, but that first she had to see if the man she'd sacrificed everything for still wanted what they'd both walked away from. The letter had sailed south with Sina, carrying apologies and hope in equal measure. The ride north passed in a blur of spring landscapes emerging from winter's grip. Melting snow created streams where none had existed before. Early, flowers pushed through frozen ground with stubborn optimism. Birds returned from southern migrations, filling the air with song. The world was being reborn, and Dalla wondered if she was being reborn with it, or simply making the same mistake in a different way. Thora spoke little, which Dalla appreciated. Her thoughts were too tangled for conversation. What would she say when she saw Gunnar? What if Ragnhild refused to let her enter the settlement? What if Gunnar had moved forward, accepted the future his oath demanded, and her return only caused destruction? What if he looked at her and felt nothing but relief that she'd been gone? They reached the settlement as the sun set on the third day, painting the longhouse roof in shades of copper and gold. Dalla's stomach twisted into knots. Everything looked the same but felt different, like returning to a childhood home and finding it smaller than memory suggested. She paid Thora, who nodded once and rode away without ceremony, leaving. Dalla standing at the settlement's edge with nothing but the clothes on her back and more courage than wisdom. She walked through familiar paths toward the longhouse, each step deliberate. People recognized her, their faces registering shock and confusion. Whispers followed in her wake. The thrall who'd been sold, the one their Jarl had nearly destroyed himself over. She was back, and her presence raised questions nobody knew how to answer. The great hall's doors stood open to the spring. Evening. Inside she heard voices, the sounds of the evening meal beginning. She paused at the threshold, her courage faltering. This was madness. She should turn around, return to the trading settlement, book passage south to her father and a life that made sense, but her feet carried her forward anyway. The hall fell silent as she entered. Every face turned toward her, conversations dying mid-sentence. At the high table, Gunnar sat with Ragnhild at his right and several carls spread along the benches. He was thinner than she remembered, his face drawn and tired despite being surrounded by plenty. He held a cup of mead but hadn't drunk from it, just stared into the liquid like it held answers. When he looked up and saw her, the cup slipped from his hands. It hit the table and tipped over, mead spreading across wood in a dark pool. Nobody moved to stop. He stood so abruptly his chair crashed backward. For a long moment, he simply stared at her like she was a ghost, an impossible vision. His grief-addled mind had conjured. Dalla. Her name left his mouth broken and disbelieving. I'm real. Her voice carried across the silent hall. I'm here. Ragnhild rose slowly, her face an unreadable mask. You were sold. You were given means to find your family, to start a new life. Why would you come back? I found them. My aunt, my father, everything you told me about. They wanted me home, offered me everything I should want. Dalla's eyes never left Gunnar's face. But standing on that ship, about to sail towards safety and propriety, all I could think about was a man who loved me enough to set me free, who broke himself trying to do what was right for everyone except himself. So you've come to destroy his oath? Ragnhild's voice held steel. To undo everything we sacrificed to build? No. Dalla finally looked at Ragnhild. I've come to ask him a question, and whatever he answers, I'll respect it. I won't push, won't manipulate, won't make this harder than it has to be. But I walked away once without giving him a real choice. I won't make that mistake twice. Gunnar moved around the table, closing the distance between them with measured steps, like he feared she'd vanish if he moved too quickly. Up close, she saw the toll these months had taken. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. New lines bracketed his mouth. He looked like a man who'd survived something terrible but hadn't fully recovered. You shouldn't be here, he whispered, but his hand reached for hers. Contradicting his words, his fingers trembled as they brushed her palm. I swore an oath, in front of everyone. I promised to set aside personal desire for duty. I know. Dalla laced her fingers through his, holding tight. And I'm not asking you to break it. I'm asking you to tell me honestly if what we had, what we felt, if it's worth finding a way forward that honors both your oath and your heart. Because I spent 3 months being free and realized freedom means nothing if I'm living a life someone else chose for me. Ragnhild stepped forward, her face conflicted. This is exactly what I tried to prevent. You'll tear him apart again. He was finally starting to what? Gunnar turned to his sister, and Dalla heard anger threading through his exhaustion. To accept being empty? To go through the motions of leadership without caring about any of it? To marry whatever alliance-building bride you pick and produce heirs I'll resent because they're not hers? His voice rose. I kept your oath, Ragnhild, every letter of it. I put clan first. I made hard decisions. I never pursued or consorted with any thrall. But she's not a thrall anymore. She's free. The oath doesn't cover this. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Dalla saw Carls leaning together, debating this new complication. The oath had been specific. Gunnar had promised not to pursue thralls, but a free woman of noble birth? That was different territory. Torstein stood, his scarred face thoughtful. The Jarl has, a point. The oath was about not letting ownership and attraction cloud judgment. But if she's free, if she comes to him of her own choice, that's not the same situation we swore against. It's a technicality, Ragnhild protested. The spirit of the oath? The spirit was about duty over personal desire. Another Carl interrupted. But our Jarl has proven he can choose duty. He let her go. He's led us well these 3 months. Maybe the question isn't whether he can be strong enough to sacrifice. Maybe it's whether we're wise enough to let him have something for himself after proving he'll give it up when necessary. Debate erupted. Some Carls agreed that Gunnar had earned the right to pursue happiness alongside duty. Others argued that accepting Dalla back set a dangerous precedent. Dalla stood in the center of it all, watching Gunnar's face as he processed the unexpected support from men he'd thought would condemn him. Ragnhild held up her hand, silencing the hall. Her face had gone. Through a series of complicated emotions, finally settling into something like resignation mixed with grudging respect. I wanted to protect you, she said to Gunnar. I wanted to save you from making choices that would destroy everything. But maybe I was protecting you from the wrong thing. Maybe the real danger wasn't loving her. Maybe it was becoming someone who couldn't love at all. She turned to Dalla, and for the first time, Dalla saw vulnerability in those calculating eyes. If you hurt him again, if you make him choose between you and his people, I will make what I did before look like mercy. Understood? Understood. Dalla met her gaze steadily. But I'm not asking him to choose. I'm asking him to build something where he doesn't have to. Gunnar's hand tightened around hers. I don't know how this works. I don't know if we can make this work with everyone watching, judging, waiting for us to fail. Neither do I, Dalla admitted. But I spent 12 years having no control over my life. Then I had 3 months of freedom and realized that safety without love isn't freedom at all. It's just a prettier cage. She searched his face. I'm not asking for easy. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking if you want to try. Knowing it'll be hard. Knowing we'll face resistance. Knowing we might fail. Yes. The word came out immediate and certain. Yes, I want to try. I've spent 3 months being the Jarl everyone needed and dying a little more each day. I can't keep living. Like that. I won't. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with desperate relief. Dalla buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling his heart hammering against her cheek. Around them, the hall erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered, some muttered disapproval, most simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Ragnhild cleared her throat. If you're doing this, we do it properly. Public courtship, appropriate waiting period, a marriage. That strengthens rather than weakens your position. I'll start negotiations with her family, establish her status formally, make sure no one can question the legitimacy. Gunnar laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. You're helping us? I'm protecting the clan by making sure you don't do this stupidly. But Ragnhild's expression softened. And maybe I'm realizing that protecting you means letting you be human, not just a title. The evening dissolved into complicated negotiations. Dalla sat at the high table, no longer a slave but not yet fully accepted, existing in the uncertain space between. Carls asked questions. She answered honestly about her past, her family, her intentions. Some remained skeptical. Others warmed to her straightforward manner. Through it all, Gunnar's hand stayed linked with hers under the table, a private promise in a public space. Later, when the hall finally emptied and they stood alone in the courtyard under stars that had witnessed everything, Gunnar turned to her. I'm terrified this is a dream, that I'll wake up and you'll be gone again. I'm terrified too. Dalla touched his face, tracing the new lines grief had carved. Terrified we'll disappoint each other. Terrified we'll fail. Terrified that choosing love over safety makes me foolish instead of brave. Then we'll be terrified together. He kissed her forehead gently. And we'll figure out how to build something that honors both duty and heart. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. They stood together under the vast northern sky, two people who'd been forced to choose between love and duty, now daring to imagine a future where both could exist. The path ahead remained uncertain, full of obstacles and opposition, and moments where they'd question everything. But they would walk it together, no longer running from what they felt, no longer sacrificing themselves on the altar of what others expected. They'd been tested by separation and emerged stronger for it. Whatever came next, they'd face it as partners, building something new from the broken pieces of what they'd both lost. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared. The same stars that had watched their separation now witnessed their reunion. The world kept turning, indifferent to human struggles, but in that moment, standing in the courtyard of a settlement at the edge of the world, Dalla felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. She felt like she'd finally come home. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose love when the entire world tells us to walk away. Dalla and Gunnar's story reminds us that real strength isn't about sacrifice alone. It's about knowing when to fight for what matters most, even when the cost seems unbearable. They were tested by separation, by duty, by impossible choices that would have broken lesser souls. But they discovered something profound, that protecting someone you love doesn't always mean leaving them. Sometimes it means standing beside them through the storm, building something new from broken pieces, and daring to believe that love and responsibility can coexist. What would you have done in Dalla's place? Would you have chosen the safety of family and a fresh start, or risked everything to return to an uncertain future with the person who held your heart? Would you have had the courage to refuse freedom when it came wrapped in conditions that would destroy someone you loved? These aren't easy questions, and maybe that's the point. The most meaningful choices in life rarely are. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that dig deep into the human heart, stories that remind us what it means to love, to sacrifice, and to fight for what we believe in. Your support helps us bring these powerful tales to life. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing hope when fear would be so much easier.